Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, thank you very much for joining the second day of the MENA Desalination 2025. Yesterday we had a great day. I received an extremely and an overwhelming really feedback from various attendees. The drawback of this session is that the exhibition is so good that people like to stay in the exhibition rather than coming to the sessions. But today we have a very exciting day again in front of us. And the most important aspect is that again we will have a government panel discussions which is largely represented by EWEC, followed by country briefing, and then a number of industry innovation showcases. Will be a very dense day. I hope you will have the patience and the persistence to go through all the day, because it will be very intense. And really, I look forward to a great day of conference today. Let me start introducing the first panel discussions, which deals with a very interesting aspect, is the integrated water resources, desalinated water as a sustainable alternative to groundwater supply. We know this is a problem that is gaining importance and gaining attention everywhere in the GCC. And here we have really a big delegations from EWEC who's going to enlighten us about these things. We have basically all the key segment of EWEC represented with the planning sessions with Dr. Edda Kalbuz. Please come to the stage and please welcome Dr. Edda, which is Integrated Water Resource Senior Specialist. Obviously, we have the lead power modeler in the United Arab Emirates, that is Paul Leroux, a person that has been really a seasoned and veteran in our industry for a long time. Then we have the asset management with John Robert Caruso, Construction Director. Welcome. And then Mr. Suresh Altikar, which is the Engineering Director and represent Asset Development. Please welcome Mr. Suresh. Thank you. Thank you. And then I will sit close to you. I understand that you have been mapping quite extensively the groundwater resources in the UAE, and therefore you can give us a quite large overview on how these groundwater resources are going to be developing or depleting over the next decades, and how serious the situation is. I understand there are also some slides, and please feel free to call on when you want to show them up.
Dr. Corrado, it's working.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. So yes, thank you for the introduction. There's a first slide that we'd like to maybe show at the moment in the background, so that we can give you a bit of context on the study that we carried out.
Yeah.
So let me see. Next one, please. Right, so what we'd like to start with is to show you the water balance of all water usage that you have in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. So you have on my right the desalinated water that is currently produced. That's about 1,100 million cube per year. And from that desalinated water, about 30% finds its way into the recycled water network. Then on the other side, you have the groundwater usage. So I'm a desalinated water person, that's my background. So when we started this investigation, I was actually surprised that about 60% of every water consumed daily in Abu Dhabi actually comes from the ground. It's about, 2,200 million cube per year. And from that 2,200 million cube per year, only a small proportion of that is renewable. There's a large deficit. The deficit is 1,366 cube per year. So it's quite a large deficit that you have every day in Abu Dhabi. And what this deficit does, it means that the farmers, who are the main user of this water, the level and the wells decreases. The salinity that those farmers find out that, as the water decreases, the salinity increases, and the productivity that those farmers have then decreases as well. And we modeled, that was the purpose of our project last year, so Eda did that. So we modeled that within 8 to 15 years, the current setup will lead to no more water into the wells. So at that time, what the farmers will have to do is either go deeper and try to access lower levels of water, which are even more saline. And if they do that, they'll have to install RO units into the farms. There are currently about 1,500 RO units in farms already in operation at the moment. It's considerable. And and as more farmers will then install those RO units, they'll produce brine, which is going to be there in the farms inland. So that's going to become then an environmental issue. So from that investigation, we looked at how to achieve a sustainable resource, and that would be then the second slide. Right, so from the second slide, that's one of the themes. We don't want this to become a slide presentation. We did want to be a discussion.
It's helpful for the discussion, so
it's just a bit of context. But so one of the themes is a full substitution of the groundwater by desalinated water. And in order to achieve that full substitution, we would need to install within the next 8 to 15 years, maybe 1,600 million cubic meter per year. So that is 1.5 times our current production of water, and 380 kilometers of pipeline to transport that to the users, plus pumping station, plus tanks, plus distribution network, and the whole equipment that you need to get there. And so we thought that you'd be interested to hear about that 1,600 million cube per year of a potential project in the future.
And actually, if you go to the previous slides, I just see that, part of this balance is also relying on recharge from rainfall, which is going to be unpredictable considering the climate change. It's going to be also affected by the recycled water production, which is currently 30% of which is not utilized. So I guess there is a lot of variability as well in this assumption. So sensitivity becomes important.
Yes. So we don't suggest that indeed 1,600 million cube will be installed, because that quantity will depend on the blending of water between desalinated, recycled, and the groundwater. It will depend heavily on the efficiencies that the farmers will achieve with their usage of water. At the moment, the efficiency that the farmer have is actually pretty poor. The irrigation the water is wasted. And in addition to that, the water is very saline that comes out of the ground. Currently is already saline, so they need to over-irrigate in order to protect their roots. So there will be some savings that's going to be achieved at that time.
But then let me ask a spicy question, maybe more for assets than for development. Let's say, if you go to the next slide, and then we say 1,500 farmers have their own RO. So they will extract water from aquifer and have their own RO, which is somehow house managed with maybe a recovery of 70%, 65%. Wouldn't it be also worthwhile to have a centralized, maybe you can reverse osmosis plant that take water from there, deep aquifer, but run it as an industrial plant, so with a recovery of 95, and therefore perhaps with a system that have a deep water injections aquifer to avoid the increasing salinity of the impact of the increased salinity and decrease the depletion, because you get better use of of the extracted water. If you go from 70 to 95%, you save 20% of the water. Anyone who wants to answer in EWEC, Paul, feel free to.
I got my mic up, so I'll jump right
jump.
in. So I think, well, let's think of the benefits first, right? So when you go from small units to larger, obviously there's scale there, and there's immediate benefit that you're going to get from the economy of scale. If you look at our large-scale desalination plants on the coast, obviously what we're able to do there is reduce the specific power consumption. So the SPC is drastically reduced. You get efficiencies just from procurement, from the construction industry, et cetera. So bringing that to inland, obviously you would expect the same sort of benefits if you're going from thousands of individual units to one larger unit or several larger units. Those are the immediate benefits that you would get. There's also transmission benefits. If you look at this screen right here, you can see that if we're moving water from, for example, Murpha to Liwa, which is what's happening, that obviously has cost to it. That has infrastructure costs. The transmission itself needs to either be built or upgraded to account for that. And of course, you have issues that you have to manage with transmitting water quality and deterioration of the network, et cetera. So all of that would obviously be a benefit if you can bring the generation to the demand and get rid of all those issues. Then conversely, you have to deal with some issues. So building in the desert is not as easy as building on the coast. We have to make sure we have roads and other infrastructure to do that. In general, there's other issues that, for example, the brine discharge. How are we going to manage that? I know this is something that maybe Suresh may touch on a little bit. Those on the coast we can manage. We have ways of doing with it, but when you bring the problem inland, you have to think about how you're going to deal with that.
How much time you have? Thank you. Ada, you have done a lot of studies on the situation of the aquifer. So what is the time frame? How much time do we have before we hit a deep water aquifer? And then things are going to get sour, I guess.
That you need to look at that from different perspectives. Overall, there is actually quite a good amount of groundwater available overall in the UAE. Even when we're just looking at the shallow aquifer, there is water resources available if we would continue with the current rate for another probably 200 years maybe. But the current problems are very localized. We see on that map actually the green shaded areas are the current irrigation centers or farming centers where most of the current abstraction occurs. And in those farming areas, we see a very, very strong decline of the water levels. In some areas, it has gone down 50 meters over the last 20 years. So that's 50 meters. So that's a considerable drop in water level. And in those areas, that can't go on much longer. So we have found in our studies that some of those areas within 8 to 15 years, as Paul was said earlier, the water levels will drop below the depths of most of the currently existing wells. And so either the wells fall dry or the farmers will have to drill deeper wells.
And what about salinity?
Salinity is of course another issue. Salinity is already quite high in many of those areas, which is the reason why there are so many desalination units on farms already, but that also differs a lot by region. So, for example, along the Liwa Highway area, there are some pockets of fresh water that are considerable, so the water has a salinity that is appropriate for farming, but then...
is fossil water.
It is still old water, but there are also recent components in it. So that recent recharge does happen, just not huge amounts. So only around 6% of the rainfall becomes groundwater recharge in the end. But if we talk about the inland RO idea, then we just need to look at where the problem currently is concentrated and where are areas where the problem of groundwater level drop does not exist yet and where there are actually still good volumes available. And we see on the map there are, around the Liwa Desert area, for example, there is a relatively large volume of groundwater available that has a relatively low salinity. So relatively low compared to seawater. So in terms of desalination, that's a big advantage. But still more saline that a farmer would wish for. So we are talking about slightly above the limit that farmers usually would like to have. So you still would need to desalinate it, but it's not like seawater. So.
But what about initiatives like I know the UAE is investing a lot on artificial rainfall or cloud seedings. Would this somehow mitigate the problem and somehow help in recharging aquifer?
So what I have seen from studies from NCM on their cloud seeding program is that cloud seeding may enhance rainfall by, so I read one paper where they said 20% would be an optimistic, probably.
20%
would be an optimistic estimate. But considering that only 6% of that actually becomes groundwater recharge, that's then still a small amount. And
so now, obviously, asset development comes into the picture now. Suresh, when we have to develop all of this infrastructure now to do that, what is the planning and to do that, and how is coming out? This is a huge program for the Emirates. It involves new coastal desalination plants, significant pipeline transportation infrastructure, and all that. So can you tell us about the implementation of this program?
Yeah, so we can develop the desalination plants maybe closer to the demand. However, there are many challenges. So the first one is whether we have the feed water available in the area which can be desalinated. So that is the first one. Given that if the water is available and if it is rainwater or even the groundwater, the further extraction might then again put stress on the groundwater levels. But for a moment, if we say that this water will be utilized, and if we can use the reused water in the area, particularly with respect to, say, the TSE, then that can also be used for, say, agriculture purposes. The second challenge that we will have with this RO plants closer to the demand would be disposal of the brine. So how do we dispose the brine? One may be having long pipeline to the sea, but then it is not viable, perhaps, economically. A second would be the evaporation tanks with enhanced evaporation methodology like sprinkler system and all that. With that also, the area requirement for the evaporation would be much higher. So it will take away the area from the agriculture use. So these are the challenges. The third one could be the ZLD technology, where we can use the brine for the crystallization. But then I think today's economics doesn't suggest that it is viable. So these are the multiple challenges about the having the RO plants closer to the demand. And the last one, and which is most important, is also the getting the financing for such projects, because there has to be some revenue stream in order to develop such plants, because we are looking at the international developers. So there has to be financing, there has to be revenue stream. Unless and until that is established, it will be difficult for developing those the desalination plants closer to the demand area. What is the alternative then? The alternative, as we are currently doing, is we are developing the desalination plants closer to the sea coast, where there is a product water which is around 1/3 of this water that is taken from the sea is the fresh water that is converted to, which can be used for multiple purposes, of course, for the drinking and also the agriculture. But then the agriculture demand is in region. So if we have to transport that, again, the pipeline and the network that is required to transport the water would be around 100-150 kilometers. So that economics also needs to be seen in order to meet the demand deficit that Paul has actually reflected around 1,366 million meter cube per year. So it's a huge demand that we'll have to meet. And I think considering that we have this, the seawater, which is actually indefinite resource available that can be tapped into to meet a very large demand that we are facing towards.
Thank you. Question, Paul. This program, which is now going to be a massive program, a significant undertaking, the aim is to maintain the status quo, so avoid future depletions, or in the longer term will also restate or replenish the aquifer to the pre-industrial conditions. That is, how can I say, restore the conditions. I understand that water for irrigations will remain in the cycle, and then as we enhance the system, there will be also a replenishment of the water situation.
So the aim of the study is achieve sustainability for the farming sector. Right? So and to highlight to the government and to the authorities the choices that they may have ahead of them in order to sustain that part of the economy. So in order to sustain the farming, one can say, I will transfer groundwater to desalination water, and I'm going to leave the groundwater as it is. One could say, I want to recover the groundwater, so we have investigated what that would mean we have considered what that could mean to go higher on the groundwater. But we could also use the groundwater as a finite resource that will be depleted and used to smoothen the transition between groundwater today to a mix in the future.
Yeah.
And that decision has not been made yet, so there we are still exploring the various options. One of the remarks I wanted to make about the inland RO is that it's going to be more complicated to make an inland RO than it is to make a coastal RO. I think that EWEC has become exceedingly efficient at making large, cheap coastal plants. But our mandate is not only to look at least cost, it is also to look at additional factors. And the security of supply is something that I find very attractive, because if I had an inland RO that would provide me a reasonable quantity, that inland RO is actually tapping in another source than the seawater or the rain. And so those are the case that we try to build to make the life of my colleague more complicated, but gain a benefit in terms of security of supply.
But you're saying that it's more expensive to have an inland RO than a coastal RO, but
I don't know.
Looking at the number, coastal RO 3 kilowatt-hour per meter cube, inland 1.5 to 2 kilowatt-hour per meter cube. Yeah. Membrane, recovery 45 versus recovery of 85. Of course, there is the brine disposal that is not a cost there. Yeah. So how comes that there is this overall, obviously you have done your studies, but can you just highlight how this conclusion came out?
So I can tell you the conclusion, I can't tell you the numbers, but because I don't remember them.
You're not supposed to.
But the initial estimation was that inland RO was somewhat more expensive than coastal RO. And the reason is that coastal RO is so efficient compared to a project more inland. But inland has the advantage of low salinity, which is,
Clear.
that's one. You're producing the desalinated water close to the farmer. You have only to dispose of the brine, which is a smaller pipeline than, it's a smaller quantity than if you had to produce all of the water. And you have the advantage of offering that additional source that could become available. Now, the risk of that inland RO is that we will do our utmost to decrease the demand and the farmers. So there is a risk out there that you design the inland RO on, for example, 50 million gallon or 80 million cube per year, but as time passes, that RO becomes more and more an availability, a security of supply system rather than an active water supply.
Yeah.
And if I just finish, at the moment our model. So we did an economical model. We show it a little bit more expensive, but we didn't have much time. We just dropped it as one of the themes. We want to continue. We will continue to investigate and see if we can make it work.
But from the point of view of the water quality, understand that desalination plant coastal produce water quality according to RSP regulations and I don't know which is now ADWIA regulations, TDS 500 or 250. For irrigation, you need a TDS 1500, if I remember well. So there would be dedicated RO plant only for agricultural reasons, or there will be RO plant that will produce water for domestic purposes, and part of it will be used for dedicated. So you'll take the benefit of, how can I say, lower TDS, although it's not significantly high.
So we haven't investigated that, but my view at the moment is one production type, which provides desalinated water, and leverage then on the security of supply, because we are investigating whether the consumers of desalinated water, so that would be residential, that would be commercial, have a higher requirement for security of supply than farmers. And so my first investigation will be looking at common plans, but different network that support each other with different security of supply. So the security of supply actually means different level of investments and different level of quality.
Clear.
Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the key issues of the TDS. So when we're producing coastal water, we're producing drinking water. It's actually 200 TDS is what the target from the contract. You were mentioning RSP, DOE regulation requires now maximum 600 TDS for drinking water. So you get that benefit when you're producing the coastal water, if you will, that you can use it both for domestic purposes and for the farms. If we go now to inland RO and we're producing TDS at 1500 or whatever suitable for the farms, it may not be suitable for domestic consumption. So that's one of the unfortunate downsides, is that you can't multi-use it. You can't integrate it into the network. And balancing the network, making sure that we have security of supply, which means water anytime, 24-hour storage. Obviously that sort of goes against that. So we need to balance that issue, is making sure that we always maintain security of supply. It's a number one goal. Of course, reducing the cost coming after that. And that becomes part of the challenge. How do we build a system where different users are using different levels of TDS?
Clear.
And we have to cater to that.
But then by doing this, obviously, you'll lose a little bit of benefit, not only on TDS, but also on remineralization, chemical costs and things like that. Post-chlorination, you will have to post-chlorinate with chlorine dioxide, which is more expensive than sodium hypochlorite and so on and so forth. So that is anyhow the program, to have a fully integrated supply.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you have those challenges when we're producing drinking water. We have to make sure it's meeting all water quality requirements.
Yeah.
We have to disinfect the water, which has its own challenge, the byproducts that can come from disinfecting the water. So what's the solution? Well, maybe it's the blend, right? It's not investing fully in inland RO or fully on coastal RO. of small projects, large projects, but having the right mix, making sure that we recycle the water as well, which Paul was discussing earlier. All of those ingredients are going to make the pie, right? That we need all of it, not just one or the other. At the end of the day, the coastal road, there's other challenges too. The coastal land is prime real estate. This is not, it looks plentiful. Looks like we have a lot of coast here, but when you come to it, when you actually look at it, the shallow waters in some area which aren't, very usable for desalination plants. Closer to the city, obviously, there's real estate sort of challenges. Everybody wants to be on the coast, not just their desalination plants or your generation plants. So you have to deal with that land issue as well. Land is not as plentiful on the coast as it is inland. So you have this pros and cons on both. And I think ultimately you're going to have to look at both as a sort of sustainable way forward.
And obviously, Suresh, these plants will be all PPPs. So you'll rely on the private sector to, in the full style of EWEC, to provide, install, supply the generation plants. But what about the pipeline? Are these also going to be resourced to the private sector, or is going to be built as a public investment through Transco, which is now?
Yes, all the desalination plants that EWEC develops and also the power generation plants are on the PPP basis, and which is very efficient, and also with that process we are able to keep the network cost of or the cost of water and cost of electricity as low as possible due to the tendering and the competition. Coming to the pipeline that is required, currently we don't have the PPP actually framework for the pipelines. Currently all the transmission network for the water is owned by the Taka Transmission, and EWEC is operating those networks in order to provide the water to the users. Yes, in other countries, of course, there is also possibility taking that experience from the overseas. This is another possibility of having the network developed through the PPP framework. But this will need the kind of approvals from the government and the regulators like DOE in order to do that. But EWEC, if such approvals are available, can procure the pipeline network as needed for the country.
So at this point, you see a scenario where when this program will be implemented, there will be some sort of enforced regulations whereby farmers will be forbidden to abstract from natural resources, will be somehow obliged to procure water through the network. That is going to be some sort of a regulatory framework to prevent over abstractions and to control the situation and the health of the aquifer.
Yeah, so here we encroaching into the DOE, the Department of Energy prerogatives, but there are several ways to do that. One of the way is trying to forbid activities to be carried out, but the wells, and at the moment it's like, I think it's 48,000 wells that are in operation at the moment. Those wells are private properties. They are within the farmers' areas. Most of those wells are within the farmers' area, owned, operated, maintained by the farmers. So it's going to be quite difficult to go in there. So another way to achieve the farmers shifting is incentivize the farmers from going from one water to the other one. And you can incentivize the farmers by cost, of course, but also by more social incentivization, to talk about the benefits for future generations of maintaining a groundwater and changing to a sustainable supply. And really community engagement. That's usually the typical answer for this. It's a community engagement.
Also, I would like to take the advantage that we had the presence of our welcome guests from Saudi Arabia and WC. We discussed yesterday in coming, and maybe Ada, you can help us here about the issues of the presence of radionuclides in the deep water aquifer. So obviously, when you have this abstraction from deep water aquifer, you have the likelihood of radionuclides and presence of radioactive materials to be accumulated in the membranes if you abstract them, or God forbid, in the brine, and then go into the system and the aquifer. So I'd like to know if this is an issue here, because we are mainly taking from shallow aquifer and not deep aquifer, and how this is going to be eventually managed.
Yeah, so in the shallow aquifer, that's actually has not been discovered as an issue in any of the samples from the shallow aquifer. So if we think about just using the shallow aquifer for a potential inland RO, I don't see there is a problem. The deeper aquifers have not been well investigated here in the UAE, I must say. So there have been a few studies, but so far I'm not aware of that this came up as an issue. So, but we would probably look at the shallow aquifer anyway. It has been found from the few studies that were made that the deep aquifer is not very productive. So that could be a challenge in terms of just getting the required flow rates from it. But as I said, it has not been well studied, so I can't really say a lot about it.
So at the moment, there is no, all the membranes that are by farmers and all that are just disposed to landfill normally, and there is no enforced regulations on this point. Not at the moment. And I was wondering, in this map, the aquifer finish in Al Ain because the maps ends up in the UAE, or continues also to Oman? And how is going to be a joint management which is inter-regional, I would say international, of the aquifer?
That's actually a very good question.
You're doing a lot of efforts, and want to expect the other party to do the same to prevent the depletion of the aquifer, aren't you?
No, the aquifer definitely goes to Oman. Definitely, actually, the water comes from the Oman mountains and flows into the UAE.
So you are stealing.
We are stealing their water. More in the, well, if you want to say it like that. However, the more southern areas around Al Ain, there is actually not much farming on the other side of the border. I just looked at that recently because I was wondering the same. I think in the more northern parts, that should definitely be discussions about how to best manage that. Yeah.
I know in the Northern Emirates, there is Sharjah has a very, very huge aquifer which is shared with Oman, obviously, and that's obviously brings the issue of a joint management of this resource, which is cross-boundary, and a joint responsibility about that. I would like to ask a question. This is a little bit a crazy idea, but I'm doing a study for the World Bank, and beyond desalinations, I would say, we are now thinking about desalinations as a way to supply water demand, simple as that. But clearly the UAE are strongly committed to zero net in 2030. Now, if you make the energy balance of a normal desalination plant with a 2.5 kilowatt hour per meter cube, and with the UAE achieving a CO2 efficiency of 400 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour. As I said yesterday, if you grow simply a guava tree, which requires 5,000 liters per year, you introduce in the atmosphere 10 kilograms of CO2, and the GAF3 will take out from the atmosphere 30 kilograms of CO2. So I'd like to pick up your idea, whether you have these visions of desalination coming today not only as a solutions to provide water supply in increasingly thirsty world, but to become a way to restore our lost forest, to recharge the battery of the earth, in the sense to increase our chemical potential by increasing oxygen versus CO2, increasing carbon in the form of cellulose and glucose rather than in the form of CO2. Anyone? I mean, I'd like to pick up everyone's brain on this one.
Yeah, so on the decarbonization, UIC has a huge program, and we are planning to have
Afforestation.
net zero by 2050. And we are working towards that by increasing the penetration of all the renewables, that is solar PV and the wind, etc. And also in future we are planning to have the solar PVs with batteries, so that we can have the round-the-clock availability of power based on the renewables. So that's the idea. However, we also need to develop the conventional power plants, because just to know that the renewable energy is not a continuous source, it's an intermittent source. And just as an insurance policy, we need to have those plants also on the grid available. So coming to desalination, the desalination plants, to support that sustainability drive, we would be using that, say, green energy for producing the water. And as we have the more and more desalinated plants in the country for the agriculture as well as the domestic and commercial purposes, as you mentioned rightly, that when it goes to the ground, it is kind of recharging the batteries, or the aquifers will be utilized. So yes, in a way, it is helping towards the sustainability.
John and Paul, John, you were with Master, so I'd like to have your
Yeah,
two minutes.
This is actually where an entity like EWIC is well positioned, because we're not just operating water, we're operating power. And when it comes to the carbon footprint, or the carbon sort of emissions from a desalination plant, it's directly linked to the power consumption. So you mentioned SPC. This is obviously very important. The lower energy that's being used by the desalination plant to produce a meter cubed of water, that's beneficial, and there's a lot that can be done there with efficient membranes, pumps, motors, etc. So that's one aspect of it. But there's the more interesting aspect, in my view, is how we couple the energy need from a desalination plant with balancing the power network.
That's right.
So let's look at an example that exists. Tuila RO, it's a plant that consumes roughly 100 megawatts. That this is the power consumption to produce the 900,000 meter cube water. There's an opportunity there when you think about the storage of the water in tanks and balancing the power network. For anyone who knows anything about the power network and balancing that, it's quite complicated. Time of day is very important. The amount of power we need midday versus the evening changes quite a bit. And trying to balance that network obviously leads to more costs, more emissions, and whatnot. By using RO as, for example, a demand response tool, we can now tackle the problems on the power generation side. And this is actually a very interesting space that we're looking at. That 100 megawatts from Tuila RO, if we turn it off, and obviously there's challenges with that. I think operating an RO plant like this is not something you necessarily want to do. However, if you can do it, all of a sudden that 100 megawatts of consumption becomes a demand response. And in the evening times when we're trying to meet peak demand, 6 o'clock, let's say, solar power is coming down, consumption in the city is coming up. Well, using RO to balance the network instead of turning on a gas plant is actually quite beneficial. So these are the things that RO actually becomes part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Agreed.
So if we move more and more away from conventional desalination towards RO, which is what we're doing, we all of a sudden have more tools. We have more tools in the chest to tackle this problem and actually manage the CO2 with the reductions. Yeah.
Paul, I know, Paul and Ed, I know that you have done a lot of studies on sustainability as well and global footprint. I'd like to have your 2 minutes, to 1 minute, as we are already over time, but thoughts about this one. Both of you, can we turn really the desert green and somehow restructure our concept about desalination?
So I don't know. My thoughts are, if we get an objective to capture carbon, we might find a better solution than using water for it. And so from an EWEC perspective, if you set a goal for us to say reduce, capture carbon, then there are probably technologies where we would look at the best mix of technology.
Like carbon capture.
And what John mentioned, I think, is a key point, is that we are uniquely positioned because we can look at opportunities in the power side as well as the water side. But the right solution will depend on the goal that is set to us.
And in fact, the EWEC has decreased tremendously their carbon footprint from 1,200 grams per CO2 to less than 500 in a couple of five years, thanks to the nuclear plant, but also thanks to renewable energy. So the grid emission factor is going to drop significantly as you retire the thermal desalination plants and so on. So we expect this to become even a further factor for.
Yeah, I'll just give some interesting statistics. This last winter, actually right now, we passed 80%. 80% of the power generation was coming from non-thermal plants, which is a huge accomplishment, and it's a tough one as well to balance the network in that state. But that's, we're talking about water here, not power. But when you tackle the power problem, you are able to better tackle the water problem. At the end of the day, energy is needed, and if you're converting desalinated water to potable water, you need power, and so hitting that problem effectively allows you to deal with the water problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had a fantastic panel. I am sorry that we cannot continue further because the discussion has been extremely interesting. I am really very grateful to our panelists. I would like you to please give them a really warm round of applause. There's been a very informative discussion, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for